Listen what Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has to say about Qatar and its role in extremism.
Could you say a few words about the falling out on the one hand of the Saudi Arabia and the UAE on the one hand and Qatar on the other? Are you moving toward a resolution of that situation?
It's not a falling out. It's just we don't want to have anything to do with them. The Qataris, since the mid-90s, have been sponsoring radicals. They have been inciting people. They have become a base for the leadership for the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood, you have to keep in mind, is what begot us Takfir and Hijrah, which begot us Al-Qaeda, which begot us Al-Nusra. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on television and justify suicide bombings. That's not acceptable. The Qataris harbor and shelter terrorists. That's not acceptable. And Nashri, the head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in 2000, entered Saudi Arabia on a Qatari passport. We captured Al-Qaeda types coming into Saudi Arabia with Qatari passports. The Qataris know this. The Americans know this. The world knows this. The Qataris are funding dissidents in the Emirates and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and in Kuwait in order to cause problems for those governments and to create instability. Why would you do this? The Qataris pay ransom to terrorist groups, including $500 million to Hezbollah in Iraq, $50 million to Qasem Soleimani, according to text messages between the Qatari ambassador in Iraq and the foreign minister of Iraq, including, I don't know how much to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Is that acceptable? If we gave $1 to Hezbollah in Iraq, we'd be sued in a court down the street. And so the Qataris use their media platforms to spread hate. The Qataris send weapons to Al-Qaeda-affiliated militias in Libya. The Qatari Emir was conniving with Gaddafi on how to overthrow Saudi Arabia. The Qataris connected Gaddafi with a Saudi dissident in London who they fund, who connected the Libyans with a group in Mecca with the objective of assassinating the then Crown Prince, later King of Saudi Arabia. Is this acceptable? We have phone conversation that the Libyans gave us after they overthrew Gaddafi, where the then Emir of Qatar is telling Gaddafi how he's recruiting princes and tribal leaders and military officers and members of the royal family to cause mischief and destabilize Saudi Arabia, and predicted that within 10 years there would be no royal family in Saudi Arabia. Is this acceptable? They do the same thing in Bahrain and in Kuwait and in the Emirates. So in 2012, we cut off relations with them, the same countries. And a year later, they came back and agreed that they will end all of this nonsense. And they signed an agreement. And nothing happened. So this time, we said, you know what? We're not going to deal with you. Unless you change. We will not allow you. There's a list of terror finances that the US puts out, the UN puts out. And a number of them are living openly in Qatar, raising money and giving it to bad people. Is this acceptable? Shouldn't be. Why do the Qataris get away with it? Because I think people see a young country, young leadership, they buy fancy buildings, they have a nice airline, and they think, wow, these guys are really modern. But we have to deal with the dark side that I just explained. And so that's why we said, unless you change, we're not going to deal with you. Now, what happened since we took this action? They signed an MOU with the US on terror financing that they had refused to sign before. They changed their laws to allow the introduction of evidence provided by a foreign government. They reduced their support for Hamas, which opened the door for reconciliation among the Palestinians. All of these are good things. Now we're waiting for them to continue to implement all the things that they promised to implement. They refused to engage in a dialogue about implementing these issues, and we refuse to talk to them. And so for us, and we've said this to them, we've taken the steps that we took. No dealing with Qatar. You can't overfly airspace. You can't import things from our market. We will not, the military cooperation is still ongoing because that's a GCC issue, and with the US, so we do that. But the other stuff is all frozen until they change. And I hope they change. And if they don't change, we're patient people. We'll wait for 10, 15, 20 years, 50 years. How long did it take you with Castro in Cuba? We can do the same with Qatar. We'll have no issue. It would be nice of them if they acknowledge that they have a problem, and then they can fix the problem. And the problem with the Qataris is they're still in denial. And we need to move them from denial to introspection so they can fix the problem. We have no hostility towards Qatar. We just vehemently oppose their behavior, which is very dangerous to us and has endangered our citizens and has endangered our security. And that's why we took the steps we took.
There are more resolutions against Israel than on Iran, Syria, and North Korea combined. More resolutions on Israel than any other country. There are 2 agenda items. We're going to begin in Geneva in about a week or 2. There's going to be another meeting of the UN Human Rights Council. One agenda item is on the human rights situations around the world for 193 countries. Another day, a special agenda item called Human Rights Violations in Occupied Arab Territories, including Palestine, meaning Israel. One agenda item for the whole world, one against Israel alone. No other country, not Syria, where they are barrel bombing hospitals, where he's killed 500,000 of his own people, Assad, no agenda item. Not North Korea, one of the most horrific places on the planet, which sits across the street at the World Health Organization Executive Board. Not Russia, which is murdering innocent people in Ukraine. There's no agenda item on any of these countries, only Israel, every meeting.
4 of the hostages have been rescued by the IDF. The operation raised some questions. For example, the hostages, Noah Almog, Andre, and Shlomi, were hosted by civilians in Gaza, the likes of a reporter of Al Jazeera and his father, who's a physician. The way the hostages were depicted in the Arab world is unbelievable. But the epitome of cruelty and anti-Semitism must be the comment of Yasser Abu Hilala, who is the former managing director of Al Jazeera. He wrote, and I'm reading the English translation, "One of the worst news since October 7th is the success of the occupation army in liberating 4 of its prisoners. But it's a battle with losses and gains. First, he calls them prisoners, like Hamas. They're not hostages. Second, seriously, this is the worst news since October 7th.
While the world in the last several days has talked about 330 drone strikes, missile strikes, ballistics and cruise missiles that have come at Israel from Iran directly, for some reason the world has lost track of the fact not about the 330 bombs and missiles that have come at Israel in the last week, but the 12,000 rockets that have been fired at Israel since October the 7th. 12,000. 9,100 of those rockets have come in from Gaza, launching at civilians in Israel. 3,100 of those rockets have been launched from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, into the north of Israel, and 35 rockets have been fired from Syria at Israel. And I ask people, how many rockets would be fired at your house before you would respond in a way to be able to make it stop? Israel has had 12,000 fired at them since October the 7th. The United States was never, ever put up with that without responding in a forceful way to say we're going to make it stop.
Douglas Murray shuts down leftist.
How come you went to Gaza when the world's media is not allowed into Gaza? There are 2 ways to go into Gaza. One is with the IDF, which is what I did and what most Western journalists have done. The other is to go in with Hamas. You could probably go in with Hamas. I can't. Ian said an appalling thing just there, that this is not about annihilation. One of the heads of Hamas, 2012, kill them all the Jews, don't leave a single one. When Yahya Sinwar said that we want to rip the hearts out of the Jews, it wasn't rhetoric. They did it. They mean it. And only this side wants to pretend they don't. To say what you just said about hostages would come a lot better if a contributor to Al Jazeera had not been discovered last week holding a hostage in his home. And if Mehdi cares about the Palestinian casualties, as I'm sure he does, then tell your bosses in Qatar to tell their friends in Gaza to stop the war and give back the hostages.
You and I, we all know the reason why you have masks. It's because you don't want us to identify you. Thank you. I appreciate your feeling. Who else would do that? Stand with what you believe in. I respect your belief. I do. But if you do that, that means show your face. Stand with what you believe in. I appreciate that. Stand with what you believe in. We're not in masks because we stand with what we believe in. We want you to see who we are. Because we're humans. Concealing your face is the point.
Apartheid in Israel exists in exactly one place, and it is maintained by Muslims, the Temple Mount at the heart of Jerusalem. To this day, the most sacred place in Judaism. That's where the great Jewish temple stood for 1,000 years before it was razed and a Muslim shrine was built on top of it. Talk about colonizers, huh? And today, the holy place is managed by the Muslim Waqf, and it goes like this. If you're Muslim, you can enter from any gate, any day, any time, and pray freely as much as you want. If you're Jewish, the apartheid regime there harshly restricts your access to one wooden gate, limited hours. You cannot bring any religious artifacts. And if you dare pray in Hebrew, or even just recite the Shema Israel like this guy, you could immediately be arrested. So, anyone up to end the Muslim apartheid in the holiest place for Jews?
Pilots Association saying they're done with offensive language. But we're not talking about the F word. We're talking about the cockpit. According to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Guide, the Pilot Association wants to stop pilots from saying cockpit because it excludes women. No more manpower either. Instead, use people power or human power. The guide also advises against addressing a group of people as you guys, since the word's not inclusive of women, transgender people, and people with different gender identities. And whatever you do, do not say mother or father. Those phrases could ostracize different family structures. Fox News has reached out to ALPA, and they told us this. There are real threats to aviation safety, but opening the doors of opportunity to ensure we have a robust supply of qualified aviators isn't one of them.